Deborah, I'm so thrilled you're here. And before I give you the mic, I'm going to ask you a question. I would love, you've been in Journey groups or you've been in the FCCI groups for 10 years, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's a long time. Can you tell us maybe that one thing that you have taken away from your time in FCCI groups over the last 10 years?
Well, there's a lot of marketplace ministries out there.
Yeah.
And I'm a member of, tangentially, of a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's a quality of both material that calls you deeper into God and the maturity of believers around the table that can help you make a journey like I'm making year after year after year. This is not an 8-week, journey. And so the one thing I think I've been sitting next to Bill Money across from Paul Jew, met Gary Opedal and Birga Alden and J.E. Wells, all of whom are here today, over 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's made all the difference.
Just a wealth of wisdom.
Yep.
Yeah, and encouragement and
Absolutely.
Direction. I
Absolutely.
love that. Well, thank you. I'm so glad you're here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Before I get started, I have to give a huge shout out to Ken Powell, Soon, Russ, the whole team back there. When God has you speak, some things come together at the last minute, and they've been essential to getting all of us speakers off to a good start. And Ken actually gave me the title for what I'm going to share with you today about strategic supernatural business. So I was one of 5 people who took a startup company and grew it to be a $58 billion New York Stock Exchange listed company in 7 years. We were a disruptor of one of the largest, most mature industries in the United States. And at one point, we were growing at $11 billion a year. What's really remarkable is we did this in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with no more than 225 employees. Crazy, right? There I was in this company with this amazing culture, with a high-powered Wall Street job, living in a resort community, my husband who loves the Lord, a beautiful young son, an amazing church, and we were the Mountain States representatives for a global ministry that changes lives. I was making close to $1 million a year, and we were giving generously. We loved nothing more than to have people over for prayer, worship nights, small groups, and fellowship dinners. We were living the dream. But I was grieved because I wasn't seeing the people at work coming to Jesus. God showed up over and over again, doing amazing miracles. We were a technology company. We were constantly rolling out new software that didn't exist in the industry. And one of those rollouts went terribly and almost brought the company to its knees. And the really hard part was the IT department couldn't fix it. This went on for like a year and a quarter. And I kept feeding the head of IT all the data, thinking it would help her solve the problem. But actually, she thought I was out to get her. One day I was praying and the Lord told me to apologize to her. And I was like, I didn't do anything to require an apology, but I knew it was Jesus. My flesh hated it, my heart loved it, and shortly thereafter, God gave me this public forum to make an apology, and I did. 2 weeks later, she was gone. I was stunned. I wasn't trying to replace her. But I realized by humbling myself and releasing the power of God, He had solved the problem, and His answer was to replace her. And I thought, I wonder if anybody else made the connection between my apology and her departure. Well, it turned out they did. A year and a half later, we were in the middle of the financial crisis, and I passed by the trading area where the CFO and the head of capital markets and the traders were pondering how to deal with a margin call. We were in the middle of a liquidity crisis. Nothing was trading. There was no way to determine the market value of a security, and they didn't know how to refute this margin call. And as I passed by, I heard the CFO say, well, we could always have Deborah call and apologize. They did know. They did make the connection. But they didn't experience Jesus. Later on, I issued over $40 billion of publicly traded securities in my time. And I had to close a $1 billion security on March 3rd of 2008 in order to keep the company liquid. And a few weeks before that, we filed our annual financial statements. As a publicly traded company, that's what you do. And in the disclosures, we disclosed the amount of margin calls we'd received in the last 3 months, and that triggered an avalanche of additional margin calls. It was so severe that our auditors decided to withdraw their management letter of our financials. Now, for those of you not familiar with public companies, that's basically saying, we're not sure this company is a going concern. And we had to make this press release of the auditors withdrawing our letter just before I closed my deal. And by putting that in the hands of the investors of this $1 billion of securities, they had the right to walk away. So you would think logically, there's no way this deal is closing, but I just kept working. I kept believing because we had to close this deal to stay in business. And sure enough, middle of Sunday night before the closing date, God spoke to me and he said, this deal is closing. We issued the public press release in the morning, put it in the hands of the investors, and they bought $1 billion of securities from a company that no longer had a management letter. That's a miracle. That's Jesus. Later, we had a standstill agreement with our lenders so that they would stop margin calling us. But in 2009, it came up for renewal. And I don't know if you remember 2009, but all the banks were in trouble. The Treasury Department was wanting them all to raise equity. And they were being very difficult in this renewal. And at one point, the CFO and CEO were told, you should really be preparing for a worst-case scenario. So there I was. I got a 6-inch binder on my desk on a Thursday afternoon. And Friday morning, one of the top bankruptcy teams in the country flew in, and I was supposed to put together the first day filings just in case by Monday. So we worked, 14 of us worked for 60 hours until Sunday night, and we got 95% of the first day filings done. And then we were told to stand down because the lenders had given us a 30-day extension. What I didn't realize is when I met with those bankruptcy attorneys, they said, how did this happen? And I said, what do you mean? Up until then, a company our size and complexity, they'd never seen first day filings happen in less than 10 days. And they were sitting there amazed. They couldn't get their head around it. And as I tried to explain Jesus, they just didn't get it. So I hope you understand, God was showing up in a powerful way, doing miracle after miracle in this company. But I came to realize miracles weren't enough. And why do I say that? Well, you know, after Jesus was crucified, the disciples went back to fishing. After all his teaching and everything they'd witnessed, they'd gone back to fishing. And it wasn't until he was standing on that beach, cooking their breakfast, and they saw their risen Lord, that they were all in. And I realized people have to experience Jesus. That's when I came to realize building great companies isn't enough. Living biblical values, business excellence, great leadership, none of it is enough. I had to start being different than everybody else in the marketplace who didn't know Jesus. I couldn't operate the way I was. I needed to become strategically supernatural in business, but I had a problem. I didn't know how. I needed to step out of the boat like Peter did, to risk everything, to follow after Jesus. And I didn't know how to do it. And frankly, as I look back on it, I think I was trapped in success. I'm going to say that again. I was trapped in success. I'm going to back up for a minute and give you a little background. As Robin did so graciously, I started my career on Wall Street, working for one of the largest institutional investors as an investment analyst. I traveled all over the world, all over the US, doing business. I met with the management teams of Fortune 500 companies, even in my early 20s. And I analyzed, by the time I left New York, I had analyzed over 3,000 businesses in just about every industry you could possibly imagine, and invested over $3 billion, managed various portfolios of billions of dollars of investments. I was 40 years old, and I don't even think I realized how extraordinary my life was. I was just following Jesus, right? And when I married my wonderful husband and we wanted to start a family, I realized I had to change careers. I couldn't have a family and do what I was doing. So I went to work for this little startup in Santa Fe. They wanted to create a new origination platform for mortgages that would generate such high quality mortgages that they could put in their portfolio and perform better than the mortgage-backed securities they could buy in the market. And I got hired because they couldn't get any capital markets structured finance professional to move to Santa Fe. I knew nothing about mortgages, but I learned. And together we built the best performing mortgage origination platform in the country. We literally had the lowest default rates and delinquency rates of any originator in the US. Our numbers were phenomenal. We were the darling of Wall Street. And even though, as I've mentioned, there were tough moments along the way, I was confident that Jesus was going to get us through the financial crisis. All we had to do is sit tight, let our collateral pay down all the different financings, and we would come through. And then it happened. The banks, under pressure to increase equity, figured out that if they marked our portfolio down $4 billion below market, seized it, and sold it the next day for $4 billion in extraordinary gains, that profit would go straight to their bottom line and straight to their equity account. And that's what they did. So, on May 1st of 2009, I headed up the bankruptcy team of the 8th largest bankruptcy in US history. What followed was catastrophic. We not only lost the company, but my husband and I lost millions in deferred compensation. I lost my livelihood, my reputation. We had to leave our home. We left our friends, our church family, our ministry to move to Albuquerque to try to find work. And one of those little known things about bankruptcy is even if you do everything right, it's the dark underbelly of the legal and financial system of the US. We had several groundless lawsuits against us. We had a witches' coven putting crap all over our house. There was spiritual warfare like you couldn't imagine against all three of us. We were battled on every side for close to a decade. And for the first time in my life, God removed everything I was relying on, other than Him and His Word, for my identity, for my sense of safety and security. It shook me to the core. You know, Corrie ten Boom's famous quote is, "You can't learn that all you need is Jesus until all you have is Jesus. And that's a painful lesson, but one that I'm very thankful to God that he took us through. Because in God's hands, it was creative destruction. He was clearing our lives out for something new. By 2012, I was done. If everything you do can be turned into this horrible, catastrophic destruction, what's the point, right? And I told God, I'm done. If you want me to do something, you're going to have to tell me. And oh, by the way, I only want to do what you're doing, right? So then came the test of obedience. He told me to become a consultant, which made no sense. I had never worked in New Mexico. I had no network, no contacts, no credentials that meant anything to anybody in the state. I had no track record, no client testimonials. In fact, truth be told, I was terrified of talking to a small business owner. I didn't know what I would say. Totally unequipped, a formula for disaster. But in the process, God was showing me something about New Mexico. It was like when Nehemiah learned of the condition of Jerusalem, and it broke his heart. As Robin mentioned, New Mexico is one of the poorest states, despite generations of technology innovation, an incredible climate, art and culture. We're last in education, economic growth, and wealth. We have more children living in poverty. We graduate less kids from high school, even though we have more PhDs per capita than any state in the country. And I could go on, but as I analyzed this state, it made no sense. It just didn't make any sense. And that's when God started showing me these patterns and these mindsets and these perspectives in leadership and the organizations in the state that were obstacles to prosperity and abundance. You know, the Bible talks about spiritual strongholds, principalities and powers, and they're often connected to locations. And he began to show me that one of the biggest strongholds over the state was a poverty spirit. Now, a poverty spirit steals vision, relationships, and resources. And even believers can be influenced and in bondage to it. I was so deeply grieved at what I was seeing in the state and the spiral that I saw it leading. But I realized that Jesus had died and he was bringing his kingdom, right? He has the victory over all of this. So I was fasting and praying and saying, Lord, you've got to tell me what is the purpose of my consulting? And finally, God gave me these words to articulate the burden that I had been growing in me over the years. He said, bring wealth and job creation to grow the economy so you can transform education and government. I was thrilled. And then the next instant I said, who am I going to say that to? It sounds crazy, right? But then I realized I can do nothing. Jesus had a plan to do all those things, and he was inviting me to join him. So I've been on this journey since 2013, and to be honest, I've had to unlearn everything that made me so successful. When you have an impossible task, the definition is it's humanly impossible. So your only choice is to wait on God, asking for wisdom, revelation, guidance, and favor. It's not been easy. I often feel like his admin. I just answer the phone, schedule the meetings, respond to the emails, and a lot of times I'm like, Lord, why am I doing this? I don't understand. But he's driving the bus, and that's the way he wants it. And I've been on this journey of learning I can do nothing. I must be a slow learner, right? But I'm trying to remain in him so he remains in me and I bear much fruit. But he wants to drive the bus, and the best I can do is look out the window and see if I can tell from the street signs where we're going, It has required more surrender and sacrifice than I would have ever imagined. We've been living by faith for most of the last 12 years. We haven't known where we would get the money to pay the bills each and every month. In 2016, we put everything in storage and moved into my mother's home. Think of it. Moving into your high school bedroom with your husband 40 years after you graduated. You can't make this up, My husband, my son, and I have been living in two bedrooms and a bathroom in my mother's home for over 6 years. Bob deserves sainthood, my mother deserves sainthood, my son deserves sainthood. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been working on a 2-foot by 4-foot folding table in my mother's office. But I can't quit. The years of prayer and seeking God have only deepened my commitment to this. It's made me have more resolve, and the vision has actually expanded. And you're probably saying now, Deb, why would anyone do this? And my simple answer is, because it's worth it. Mind-blowing things happen regularly in my life. When you're sitting there without an agenda, God starts sharing his heart, his view, his insights, his plans, and he starts revealing what's really going around you. Did you hear yesterday when someone asked Dr. Ben Carson in the morning, what's the key to your success? And the first thing he said was observation. We have to be listening to God so he can reveal what's really going on. And then he started downloading his strategies and his blueprints for how he's going to solve these problems. That's the pearl of great price, and that's worth everything. My FCCI group recently did a series by Dallas Willard called Hearing God. And one of the key things I took away from that really clarified things for me is Dallas Willard said only 10% of his time hearing God is about guidance. To me, the other 90% is giving God the time to share what's on his heart, what he wants to show us, what his agenda is, and what he's about to do. Now, here's one of the mind-blowing things that's come out of this. You may or may not be aware that over the last several decades, there's been a growing divide between the haves and have-nots in our country. And it's been accelerating. In the last decade, by some measurements, the poorest half of our country has lost 2/3 of their net worth. And the richest half have gained more than that. This wealth divide, as it's called, was even covered by CBS in a 60-minute segment back in, I think, June or July of 2020, when they spoke to Ray Dalio. And Ray Dalio is the founder of the largest, most successful hedge fund in the country, and he runs investment research that most of the wealth managers and asset managers in the country get. And he says, This growing divide between the haves and the have-nots is the number one threat to the U.S., more than pandemics and terrorism and cyber attacks and wars. Now, as I was listening to God, he started to show me the root of this problem, both in New Mexico, but also in the nation. And this is how it happened. The New Mexico Economic Development Department called me in 2018 and said, Deborah, you've got to look into this opportunity zone legislation. We created the zones in the state, but we don't think anybody's going to figure out this legislation and make it work for our state. I said, sure. So we formed a $100 million opportunity fund, and I started calling on the asset managers and wealth managers to have them vet the fund so that it would make the approved list so investors could choose it as an option for their portfolio. What I discovered in the process was that in the time I'd left New York, in the interest of economies of scale and efficiency, the entire asset management, wealth management industry had gone to huge minimum thresholds for private equity funds. And they all told me their minimum fund size was $1 billion. Now think about that. If you're a fund manager, you get all the diversification you need from 10 to 20 investments. Any more, and you dilute your ability to maximize the performance of your portfolio. So you never look at a deal that's under $50 million in equity. I can tell you definitively, there isn't a $50 million equity deal anywhere in the state of New Mexico, and in a lot of places like it. So what's happening is every American that puts $1 into a 401k, a 529, an investment account, a savings account, or their employer puts money into a pension plan, hands it to these asset managers and wealth managers. And they invest most of it in publicly traded securities, and those companies are largely in major cities. New Mexico has 5 publicly traded companies. So none of that money comes back to the state. And then what they put into private investment capital goes into these billion-dollar-plus funds. Well, they're systematically, arbitrarily redirecting the entire wealth of the country into major markets. You get the idea? So what's going on right now is there's this arbitrary, capital markets-driven disintermediation of investment capital from most of the country. And it's impoverishing rural states and rural areas of states that don't have a major market. This came from following Jesus. This is Jesus' revelation of what's going on as the number one threat in our country. Now, as I began to talk to government and capital market leaders, they confirmed what I was saying. They got it. And they started saying, Deborah, nobody's talking about this. I had people at the White House call me up and put me on the phone with the chief of staff of one of the president's top advisors, one of Dr. Ben Carson's direct reports, and I spent hours talking about this and how it relates to housing. Various people inside DC and in New York have tried to connect me with the types of people who could make a difference in this. And one person said, Deborah, you've got to talk to the Secretary of the Treasury. Because the billionaires in our country think the solution to this wealth gap is tax the billionaires more. But look, between you and me, Congress isn't doing a great job of equitably distributing the money they have, and giving them more is not going to solve the problem, right? Concentrating wealth in the hands of the few is never the answer. But God does have a solution. What we need is a lot more $100 million funds, $50 million funds that invest in smaller deals, in smaller communities and cities all across the country. But here's the really crazy thing. As a private placement investment officer, I would get paid a premium yield for investing in a private security rather than a public security. And usually it was because the company didn't want to go through public registration, or it was a complex deal, it was a difficult deal, it was out of favor, it was obscure. But if I found a good deal, I got paid a premium yield. In these small markets that are capital constrained, they're called inefficient markets. And you can actually find better risk-adjusted returns in these markets. Think about it. In the major cities, there's all this capital. If it's a good deal, everybody chases it and drives the returns down. That's competition. In the state of New Mexico, I have no competition. I can write the ticket that's a win-win for both sides. And even a real estate developer friend of mine said, Deborah, I can make a 4 to 6% higher return per year in a real estate deal in New Mexico than one in California. Same risk. So isn't it crazy that God's solution actually helps us be a better steward of our resources? Isn't it like the kingdom economy? You know, you invest in the underserved, like the Opportunity Zone legislation was designed to help create, and you can actually find better risk-adjusted deals than in major markets. This is the kingdom economy at work. So, waiting on God can reveal the true nature of problems across our country in every sector. And in the process, we can actually get the divine plans and solutions that only God can solve. Think of your favorite problem: homelessness, right? Poverty. God has already figured out how to bring his kingdom. He already is going to solve the problem. He's wondering who wants to spend the time with him to download what's really going on and get his solutions and walk with it. Now, I've had really high-powered people validate this solution. An executive committee member at one of the biggest mutual fund companies in the country, a pension fund manager who loves the Lord and manages $20 billion of Pennsylvania teacher assets. They've all confirmed that this is accurate. But their hands are tied because of their company's policies. I believe now that God is going to be connecting me to those parties that are looking for just this type of investment opportunity. But here's the crazy thing. As God downloads his vision, his mission, his plans, his solutions, unbelievers buy into it hook, line, and sinker. And I'm thinking, Jesus, this is crazy. They don't know you, and they are getting on board with your mission and your plan. So, you know, the capital markets, disintermediation of capital, systematically impoverishing half the country, that's just one thing God's shown me. He's told me how to transform education in the state. He's given me this download of how to double the average household income in the state over 10 years while bringing equity across the 33 counties, and how to bring legislative changes. But it's really not about me and what he's telling me, right? Each and one of you is sitting in the presence of God. And I believe there is an infinite amount of revelation available to all of us about every single problem you can think about. if we just want to sit with God and let him show us. Jesus said, "Greater things you will do in my name." I don't know about you, I'm not there yet. Our business is just our platform for influence and resources to transform our country. You know, what Ben Carson said last night is true, and I'm going to riff off of what was said this morning. Whoever wants our nation will get it. And you, as a business leader, have so much more that God wants to do through you than just run your business for Christ. That's kind of a given. And here's the thing, Ryan Dickinson, I'm talking to you, boy. I think FCCI is uniquely positioned to help us all get out of the boat and walk with Jesus in the supernatural. And why do I say that? I've been sitting next to Bill Money and across the table from Paul Jew every week for a decade, or on Zoom. And God speaks to me every week through the material, and I couldn't do this without them and their maturity and their biblical knowledge, because sometimes I honestly think, am I delusional? You know, this is crazy what God is telling me. It's the only place I can share the supernatural. It's the only place I can find mature believers who are going to speak into my life with biblical wisdom about the types of things I'm dealing with. And I think this is not like an 8-week one and done, okay? These relationships have taken years, and I don't think anybody can go on the journey in the supernatural to transform a state or a nation or some problem in your community without people willing to take the journey with you. Okay? So I believe we're supposed to encourage one another to get out of the boat, to be different than everybody else that doesn't know Jesus. You know, the Bible says we're a peculiar people. Some of you might say, Deborah, I think you nailed that, you know? But I need to become more peculiar in everything that means. We all have a divine destiny. We each have a piece of the solution. And I once heard that your destiny is at the intersection of everything you love and everything that breaks your heart. I know it's true for me. And I think it might be true for you. And here's the thing about the kingdom of God. The area of my greatest defeat, loss, and shame is where I am to overcome and conquer. And it's not just for me and my family. I've turned the injustice and corruption that brought down my company and destroyed our lives into a class action suit in the court of heaven. I want God to bring restoration, redemption, and recompense to every person in New Mexico who's been ripped off by the enemy. And that's everyone, right? So it's not about just us. It's about taking this on for others. I don't know when my breakthrough is coming, but I do know I'm an overcomer, and so are you. And I know that together we can transform our nation. Now, your initial reaction is probably, Deborah, I can't. It's too much. It's too painful. I'm stretched thin as it is. But what God has been telling me is I have to operate differently. When I tried to tell God that, he said, Deb, I'm calling you to walk by my Spirit and follow where I lead you, not by might and strength, but by your Spirit. I'm going to go into more of the practical aspects tomorrow in the breakout session. But basically, we need to change the way we think, live, and work We have to have God's perspective. To quote Graham Cook, every problem is an opportunity in the kingdom. In the kingdom, every problem has a promise and a provision. And every huge problem is a huge opportunity. So if you look at a problem as a gift, I feel like I got a tree the size of the Rockefeller Center tree, and I got more gifts under that tree to open. You know, I'm wealthy beyond measure. We tend to talk to God about problems when He's trying to talk to us about opportunities. And what we focus on, we empower. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so he is. It's also true for the church and for the nation. Negativity limits God and wears us out. But if we have God's perspective, we can live on His promises and on His provision and live above our circumstances. We can be transformed by the renewing of our mind. We can walk by faith and not by sight. And when you start living in His word and His promises, you suddenly don't buy into the lies of the world, just like Ben Carson was talking about last night. So I've found the race I want to run. Look, I've ridden in corporate Learjets. My husband and I have sailed America's Cup class boats in Newport every summer. I've spoken at the World Economic Forum. I've gone to corporate ski retreats at Deer Valley and Snowbird and Vail. I've been to the deepest offshore drilling rig in the world and rung the New York Stock Exchange opening bell. And none of it compares to the revelation of Jesus. Here's my hope. I hope you'll get out of the boat and walk in the supernatural. Because I think the reason Peter did that was the awe and wonder of God. You know, Brené Brown, the famous researcher into human emotion, was asked, what is the best emotion of all the 87 emotions you've categorized for people to experience? And she said, awe and wonder. Now, isn't that like our God? What do we feel when we're in His presence? He created us to live in awe and wonder. And I think that's why Peter got out of the boat. As I close, I want to leave you with 3 questions. I hope you'll talk about this at your table, ponder it with the Lord, and over the next week. First question: am I trapped in success, unable to get out of the boat to walk in the supernatural? Am I trapped in success, unable to get out of the boat and walk in the supernatural? Second, what about this fallen world breaks my heart the most? And lastly, do you want to hear from God about the root issues of the world's problems and then receive the revelation on His solution? Thank you very much. I really appreciate being here. I look forward to hearing from each of you.